All right, guys, welcome. Apologies that you're probably going to have to watch a boring video of me talking for an hour, such is the case when the weather gets to be this way. But I'm not going to waste any time and beat around the bush. Let's uh, let's get straight to it. I'm going to start by talking about the syllabus and all the class expectations. Then I will kind of give an overview talking about the history of critical theory, and I will end by introducing you to the first quiz that I'm going to have you do this week on univocal, equivocal, and analogous language. The reason why I'm having you do that is because in the first couple of weeks of class, we're going to be talking a lot about symbols and metaphors and analogies and things like that. The exercise that I'm giving you is actually from a logic textbook, but I think it'll kind of get you thinking along the right lines as far as getting started thinking about some of the theoretical approaches that we're going to be looking at in the first few weeks. So with that said, let's get into it. So let me pull the syllabus up. Okay, so critical theory. You guys, I'm just going to warn you, in any English degree or humanities degree, this is usually the toughest class you're going to encounter. So this class, I'm not going to beat around the bush and tell you otherwise. You know how both of you who are taking the class have took me multiple times now. You all did well in advanced studies in fiction last year. You know how I work, but as far as the readings and materials and things like that goes, this is by far the hardest class that you will encounter in your time. So they say that humanities degrees are easy, science degrees are hard. I guarantee you that most science majors haven't read Derrida or Saussure or any of these readings that'll make your head spin after you just read a page. Not to not to scare you away from the course though, because if you put time and energy into it, it's a very rewarding course. But this is going to be a course that's going to sort of take you to your limits. The readings are usually not, as far as terms of pages, they're not as thick as what you might have been used to in the past, but they will take you just as long, if not longer, because of the complexity of these readings. So, word to the wise there. But our class will meet Mondays 4 to 6, Basic Science 107. One thing that I would like to do would be to record these meetings because it will help you do your presentation assignments. I don't know how I'm going to do that. If you guys would agree to meet on Google Meets instead of in the classroom, I would not be opposed to it because that would make our recordings a lot easier to do. At the same time, I do enjoy seeing you in person and all that as well. So if we do meet in person, we'll figure out a way to record the session. I'll probably I'll figure it out. It's up to you guys, however you want to do it. Where the class meets 4 to 6 instead of 4 to 7, the way that I have to organize it is as a hybrid class. So 2 of the 3 credit hours in the class are in the classroom, and 1 of the credit hours in the class is online assignments. So the way that I'm going to handle that is, you'll see, I'll usually give most of the main readings for the Monday class, and then on the days, or usually by like a Friday up until the next day of class, I'll give you an extra reading. I'll have you guys do something like complete a discussion post on it. And that'll be starting next week. So that's what we do for the extra credit hour of the class that we do not do in the classroom. Whenever I do a class like this, just 2 hours once a week, I have to account for that last credit hour in order for things like our university accreditation. So rather than making you meet twice a week, having you meet once a week, and the other hour is online. So that's how that'll work. You guys know where my office is on the main campus. Google Meet link here if you ever want to meet with me virtually. The times to catch me on the main campus will be Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm in the office all day on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 12 to 5. Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm in Beckley, usually about an hour before class or so. I should be back. Well, I have ethics from 2 to 3:15, but usually that 4 to 3:15 to 4 time period, you'll be able to catch me in my office on Bluefield on Mondays. Wednesdays is going to be kind of a wild card. I'll probably be in Beckley all day most of the time on Wednesdays, just so you know. You guys have my contact information here if you ever need to reach me. I even put my personal number on there just in case of emergency, though. I would otherwise prefer that you contact me by email. There are 3 books. One of the books is in my office, and it's a snow day, so I can't go get it, but I do have 2 of them at home. Our big one is Literary Theory and Anthology. It's a giant book that you could probably kill somebody with if you hit them in the hand with it. It's about as big as the Bible, if not bigger. Don't worry, you're not going to read everything in here, probably not even a third of it. But this is our big one. This is where most of the text in the class will derive from. We're also going to read a primary text from probably the rock star of critical theorist named Slavoj Žižek. And we're going to read one of his books called The Sublime Object of Ideology. Žižek's actually a very entertaining theorist to read. He likes to intersect Marxism with psychoanalysis, as we'll find out. But he is probably the most influential living theorist right now, I would say. So we'll read one of his books. And my methodology in the class is at the very end of the class, I want to examine a piece of literature and look at it from all these different critical theories that we have engaged with. And I have never taught Herman Melville's Moby Dick before, and I wanted to take a stab at teaching it. So we will read Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I ordered the Norton Critical Edition of the book. It has a lot of different essays and stuff in the back of it that you can use as a potential source. So that's why I ordered that particular version. If you want to get a cheaper version like the Penguin Classics or something, feel free. Just know this version has a bunch of extra stuff in the back. So we will, in the last couple of weeks of the class, we will read Moby Dick. Moby Dick is a pretty opaque piece of literature. It's not the easiest to read. However, it'll probably be like reading Harry Potter after reading some of these theorists that we're going to read. So I wouldn't worry about that. But it's called the greatest work. Many people consider it the greatest work in the American tradition of literature. It's actually been a long time since I've read it, but I don't know that I would disagree with that notion. I'm very excited to read it again. I probably haven't read it since I was in your guys' shoes. I was about a senior in college when I read it, and I haven't sat down and read it ever since. So I will be looking at the book from a fresh pair of eyes right along with you all. So we're going to read that in the last couple of weeks of the class. And you guys will actually be doing your research projects on Moby Dick. You'll be doing a reading on it using one of the main critical theories that we will look at. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy Moby Dick. I thought about doing it where I would give you more freedom to write about something that you of your choice, but I figured if I was going to be a good teacher and give you good feedback, I probably needed to do it on something in which I was familiar. So that was my main reason. Maybe depending on how this goes, future times I teach the course, maybe I'll do it differently, but we'll see how it goes. It's actually my first time teaching critical theory this semester. That's part of why it took me so long to cook up the syllabus. But I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a good time. We'll skip past these learning outcomes. The course learning outcomes are the most important thing. So take a look at those. Those are the things that we will be looking at. Critical theory is kind of a mixture between an English course and a philosophy course. It's kind of a middle ground between those. It's a certain type of philosophy, as we'll talk about in a few moments. So the work in the class. The work in the class is going to be pretty intense, guys, just so you know. Again, it's probably the most intense class that you will have in our humanities program, if I had to guess. So there's two of you, Megan and Jacob. Excited to have both of you in class again after a year of not having you for a year. But the assignments, and let me explain. Starting in week 4, so week 4, as we'll see, scroll down to their calendar, February the 9th. Starting in week 4, there will be a project where you guys swap out every 2 weeks. So you guys will be responsible. So what I would like you to do is write about a 2-page double-spaced outline of all the things that we talked about in the previous class, including the tough concepts from these different theorists, like what was this theorist, what was the gist of their theory, like how did they develop their theory. I want you to provide a very detailed summary of all the things that we talked about in the previous class. Sum up our discussion. Try to map out our class in its entirety. So every 2 weeks, you guys will alternate. You can come up with a little handout to develop where you sum up the findings from the previous class. And I'm doing this because all this stuff's really difficult to learn. And if you go back and listen to these recordings and try to summarize it in your own words, it will make the learning easier. You guys will learn these concepts a lot easier if you have to kind of constantly be going back to the drawing board, listening and reviewing. It sounds like a pain in the butt, I know. It probably sounds like busy work in some ways, but it's really not. This is an assignment that I've had to do in some of my philosophy classes that I've been taking towards my master's in philosophy. I've found for really difficult readings, it definitely helps to go back and summarize it in your own words. So every 2 weeks, starting in week 4, I think week 4 I have Megan, week 5 Jacob, and so forth and so on up until the end of the semester. During the Moby Dick weeks, we'll stop doing it during the Moby Dick weeks, just as long as we're reading the theorists. I will have you guys do that. And I will also have you read or write a weekly précis before class. So a précis is where you cite a source and then summarize the source in your own words and give a brief analysis. You guys have both taken the grammar course where I assigned précis in there, so you know what all goes into that. Usually every week I'll do at least 2 to 3 different theoretical readings every week. You guys will have a choice on which one you want to write your précis on. So you don't have to explain all 3 articles or whatever we read that week. It's like if you like Derrida, during the week we read him over whatever other reading we do, you can just do your précis on Derrida if you want. And I'm going to be looking for a precise summary and response. I thought about, is it really will be a lot to do a précis and a presentation in the same day? Like I thought about like the week that you're not doing a précis, the week that you're not doing a presentation, do a précis. I thought about doing it that way, but I really shouldn't do it that way, because if I do it that way, that'll invite you to maybe slouch on your reading that week. Then you'll be lost in class. So just know that on the days that you present, you'll have 2 things due that day: a précis on whatever the today's readings is, and a presentation on summarizing last week's class. So every 2 weeks, you guys will probably have a more stressful day than normal because you'll have 2 things due on that one day. Good news is the class only meets once a week, so you'll have plenty of time, but that's where most of the stress in the class will probably come from, especially those days where you have to do both. I would say get out ahead of time and do one of them early, and then maybe over the weekend do the other one. That would be my advice. At the very end, you will do a critical analysis on Moby Dick. You'll do a bibliography first, worth 10%, and then the paper itself will be worth 20%. There will be 2 exams in the class, both worth 10% each. So I will come up with a long list of questions on the midterm. I will have you write up written responses to them. On the final, I will either do it that way or do it in an oral format where I ask you questions one-on-one in a Zoom call and test the clarity of your answers that way. I think it helps to be able to articulate the things out loud rather than just in the written word. I know it's something that I have struggled with whenever I've taken courses like this, but it does help. It's a good skill. I'll gauge your guys' mood and see how you're doing. But the midterm one will be written, the final one will be oral. That's my current thinking. I might change the final one to written too, depending on what you guys are feeling. We'll see. Homework and quizzes are worth 10. So every week I will try to give you at least 1 quiz. I'll usually probably write them after class, testing your knowledge on what we talked about. And there will be also discussions where I'll give you an extra reading to do, and then I'll have you guys do a discussion on it. Again, I have to do it that way because of the extra credit hour that we need to fill to make it a 3-hour class. Then your overall class participation is worth 10. The class with just me and 2 students on readings this difficult, it's going to make a real painful time if nobody talks. So, that's not something that I anticipate having a problem with, because I know you guys and we've had great classes together in the past, so I'm not worried about it. But your participation does include your attendance. I'm just going to, as we move down to attendance, guys, I'm just going to be frank. You just scroll down to this. This is a class where you're going to not do well unless you're here every week. For one, you have to alternate weeks in which you do your presentations. So it's going to really hurt if you're not here. Two, the material is so difficult that you're going to struggle if you're not here. So if you can't make it in person, try to make it on Zoom or on Google Meets, whatever the case, whatever we use. So technically, though, with the Bluefield state attendance policy being what it is now, can't miss more than 2 sessions and pass the class. And I will stick to that. I'm going to be a stickler for the rules this time. Just think about it, guys. If you miss class, that's 50% of the entire class gone. So that really damages the overall quality of the class if you're not there, if you're not ready to participate. If we're all here and ready to go, we'll have a great time. But if one of you's missing, it's going to really hurt. And please keep that in mind, that if you're not here, you're really doing the entire class a disservice. Okay? Again, I trust you guys, but even if things do come up, you need to make every effort to be here. Okay? If it's a life or death emergency, I'll understand. But otherwise, I'm going to get real cranky. So your attendance is not recommended, it's required. And I'm going to be pretty stringent this semester as well on late work. So things are going to be due on the day that they are due. If they are not, I'm not going to take it. With the exception of if you ask me ahead of time, I might be forgiving. But I don't want to see people going like a 2 or 3 week long bender where you don't turn anything in and then expect to turn it all in all of a sudden. I'm not going to be very accommodating to that anymore. Not that I've had to do that with you guys in the past, but I have noticed in some of my other classes that people have been taking advantage of my generosity and taking late work. And it really adds to my workload and having to constantly be going back and doing makeup assignments when I should be doing whatever I need to be doing right now. Plus, it's not fair to the people who turn stuff in on time if I'm constantly taking late stuff. So unless I give you explicit permission, I'm going to be really stringent on the late work this time. I've already explained all the assignments. Academic dishonesty and plagiarism. You guys might be tempted to, especially whenever you're doing something like a Pressy, you might be tempted to look up what somebody else says about the article. If you do that, to help your understanding, just make sure you cite it. Okay? Don't take from anybody else's ideas. Don't borrow anything without citing it. And you guys all know how I think when I think about AI and all of that. You've taken me before. And use AI as a tool, but not as a crutch. And I do mandate that you use Google Docs in the class. So all of your work, I want you to type it from start to finish on Google Docs. Make sure that you set your permissions. Anyone with the link is an editor. I actually have a little program now on my Google Docs. You see it up here. That's not going to work because I imported this file from Microsoft Word. But it plays me a little video of every single word being typed on a paper. So Make sure you do all of your typing, start to finish, using Google Docs. Then our schedule of work is here. As you see, I have it broken up, the main reading that we're going to do on a certain day, followed by the assignments that you will be doing starting on week 3. I'll start giving you guys a little extra reading to do before the next class and have you do a discussion on it. Your first Prezi you'll be due next week on the structuralism readings. So again, I'll have you read Saussure and Levi Strauss. You'll have your choice on which one you want to write your Prezi on. So today we're going to be doing a few things. Then every week after that, we're going to mostly be touching on a new theory every week, or a new grouping of theories, I should say. Week 3, we'll do structuralism. Week 4, post-structuralism. And as you see, Megan will be the presenter on February the 9th. The readings in week 4 are pretty tough. Derrida is not a breezy read. Baudrillard is actually a pretty interesting read. Week 5, we will do psychoanalysis. You guys will read some Sigmund Freud and Lacan. Week 6 will be Marxism and cultural materialism. We'll read a little bit from Marx himself, then Bordeaux and Althusser. And you will read 2 pretty interesting articles about the culture industry for the discussion. Week 7 and week 8, we will read the GJAC book. Week 9 will be spring break week. And then week 10, we will do new historicism. Week 11, gender studies and queer theory. Week 12, ethnic and post-colonial studies. Week 13, eco-criticism. So up through April the 17th or so, we will be doing really hardcore theory readings. In the last 2 weeks of class, I might break it up into 3. We'll see how it's going. But we will try to read Moby Dick during those last couple of weeks. We'll read half the book one week, half the book the other. It's about 300 pages. No, it's a little longer than that. It's about 400 pages. So those last couple of weeks will be pretty reading heavy. If you want to get an early start on it way before that time comes, probably wouldn't be a bad idea. That might be a good thing to do during spring break week. Again, it's kind of cruel and unusual to ask you to do something over spring break. But if you want to save yourself some stress later in the term, it might be a good time to start looking at Moby Dick. Of course, maybe you'll want to do an eco-critical analysis or something on it. If you read it too early, you might not have that perspective in which to look at it. In the last couple of weeks of the class, we'll work towards the research project. You guys have done research projects for me before, so that's nothing new. During your time, during finals week, I will have you guys meet and we'll have a group discussion of the drafts of your papers. I'll have you turn in a draft of your paper and we'll come together and talk about it, talk about ways you can improve them, discuss the merits of your argument. We'll kind of have a round table discussion. And I'll actually give you guys all the way up until 11:59 p.m. on Friday during exams week to turn in your paper. And you'll be doing your actual exam part that week too. Overall, guys, it's a pretty rigorous class. And of all the classes that you guys have had with me, the advanced studies in fiction, and there was a lot of reading in it. But the workload between the tough readings and the assignments being a little tougher in this one, this class will challenge you more than any other that you've had here, I would imagine. And I'm not even that tough compared to many teachers, but you can't teach this class without it being tough. The material is just too challenging. It's challenging, but it's rewarding, I think you'll find. It'll make you a better reader of literature, consumer of media after you've taken it. So I'm going to hit the pause button and take a quick break, and I will be back. You won't even notice it when you're watching the recording later. So I will be back in a moment. See, we have a pause button. I do not. I'm just going to keep rolling because I don't think I have a pause button. Okay. So let's take a look now at the handouts I've generated for you. I actually used their friend ChatGPT to help me come up with these handouts. Told it what to do though. But let's see. Again, using it as a tool and not a crutch. The first thing I want to do is this handout talking about the difference between philosophy and critical theory. So let's go over this one first. Okay, so Megan has taken ethics with me. I don't think Jacob has yet, if I recall. Let me see. So, Jacob, to speak to you directly, you'll take ethics with me at some point during the course of your program. You might even be taking it with me this semester. I don't know what your full schedule is. But both, I'm just going to pull a direct copy up here so that I can zoom in. Here we go. That's not what I want to do. Just giving me grief as far as zooming in on the document here. Hold on. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, so let me just kind of start with this. The study of critical theory and the study of philosophy, you can say in some ways that it's the same kind of endeavor, but depending on how you approach the study of philosophy, it's really not. If you've taken me for ethics, you will know that I approach the discipline of philosophy from a religious angle. Like philosophy now, depending on where you do a philosophy program, like I do mine mostly through the Roman Catholic tradition. So doing it through a tradition like that, you take certain things for granted, certain assumptions. For instance, in the Roman Catholic tradition, we believe that there is a universal truth, right? universal truth. God is the universal truth on which all being extends. With that, there's certain concepts that are not rigid. Well, they are. I said that wrong. Certain concepts are rigid and don't bend based on certain things. So, concepts like good and evil, like the faith tradition of doing philosophy, has certain rigid definitions about how you approach those concepts. Ethics is the study of the good life. Well, with the study of the good life comes the study of like, how do you have a good government? Like, how do you enforce morality? So the religious tradition of philosophy oftentimes has big answers to those questions. And whenever you do philosophy from that angle, in order to kind of do it, you have to take certain things as an accepted premise before you can proceed with the analysis. So if I'm going to do philosophy from the Catholic point of view, that assumes that I follow the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. The basic theology of that is a building block on which to build my philosophy. Critical theory, on the other hand, it mostly derives from, and Megan might remember this from taking me for ethics, it derives from the philosophy tradition that started in the 19th century with thinkers like Marx and Nietzsche. If you recall, Nietzsche, in my ethics class, we don't talk a lot about his aesthetics. We did talk a lot about his ethics. Nietzsche sort of saw the problems with subscribing to like the religious point of view, especially Christianity. He saw it as being like a herd mentality, like we're all sheep. If the shepherd tells us to jump off a cliff, we'll do it. So Nietzsche proposed that we develop a new form of morality, and to do that, it'll take a person of extreme strength and moral conviction to be able to rewrite these rules. He saw Christians as being like a slave mentality. Like if you turn the other cheek, that goes against their human nature to do that. It makes us weak, it makes us vulnerable, it makes us weak to being exploited by people who know that. So to obtain true freedom, then, it's going to take rewriting morality and ethics and all of that and reinventing the wheel. And the person who would do that would be a person of strong moral conviction, of strong character, called the Übermensch, or Superman is oftentimes a translation. The comic book character Superman actually extends out of Nietzschean philosophy. But it'll take a Superman to reinvent the wheel through his strong will to power. Usually it's a he in Nietzsche's tradition. That the Superman will do so through a will to power. Well, if you take Nietzsche's philosophy as kind of the starting point, which critical theory does, then that makes you sort of go at the study of philosophy and theory from a certain point of view. So if you take for granted, for instance, that Christians have traditionally been exploited, like Christian ideology teaches things that are contrary to human nature. People were taking advantage of us. Well, this might make us ask questions about power, like who might be exploiting us, who might be taking advantage of us. What are ideologies that people are using to kind of keep us under their thumb, so to speak? So the first thing on the chart, the primary aim, classical study of philosophy, discover truth about reality, knowledge, and the good life. So what is the good life? What is knowledge? What is reality? Critical theory is slightly different because it takes for granted that things like reality, knowledge, concepts of the good life, that certain people in charge construct those concepts. So whereas from a religious perspective, you see those as universal concepts, oftentimes ascribed by God, from a critical theory perspective, you kind of take the perspective that doesn't matter what concept it is, all concepts are ideologies. Somebody is constructing that ideology. Somebody is doing it in a way in which they can maybe do something like control the populace, turn the other cheek, right? That's a good way to enact social control on people who might otherwise try to exert their individuality. So how are people constantly being worked on? Through ideology from the people in power. Maybe not just ideology, and maybe things like domination and oppression. We're seeing that in our world right now with things that are happening in Minnesota. So theory, as you see, some of its basic premises, it's a little more cynical than what the study of philosophy traditionally is. Theory is kind of about who's taking advantage of us, how are they taking advantage of us, whereas philosophy is more concerned with let's come up with the big answers. Maybe theory is a way of doing it, but there's other ways of doing it as well. Central questions: what is real? What is true? What is the good life? Central questions of theory: who benefits? Who is marginalized? How does power operate? Traditionally in the study of philosophy, truth. What is the truth? Truth is objective and discoverable through reason. Like a common philosophy and ethics is called the natural law. Right? The natural law is this idea that good and evil are ascribed in us through God. And we know what is good and what is evil through our own innate natures. We know that murdering people is wrong, right? Nobody even has to tell us that. We know in our conscience that God is kind of pre-built into us that it's wrong. Well, so that is this idea that truth is objective, right? There is a universal sense of truth, right and wrong ascribed to us in God. That's the natural law. Compare that to critical theory that suggests that truth is often socially constructed and shaped by power. So again, it's more of a cynical view. There is no objective truth. Truth is socially constructed. So it might be there's social constructions, as we'll find out, about all kinds of things, about gender, about race, about all these different ways that people mark themselves. Method, oftentimes in philosophy, is logic, conceptual analysis, metaphysics, and ethics. The method of theory is ideological critique, discourse analysis, and cultural interpretation. Slightly different methods as far as how you approach it, how you approach asking these questions. The goal of philosophy oftentimes is knowledge for its own sake. I want to learn knowledge just for the sake of knowing. It's their innate curiosity to know. Compare that to theory, where the message is resistance, rage against the machine, right? Resistance, critique, social transformation, make the world a better place. That's kind of more along the lines of like what theory is about. Foundational thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, Kant, Hume. Critical theory, a lot of the philosophers that we've seen in the last couple of hundred years, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, Foucault, and the Frankfurt School. Human nature has intelligible structure and purpose, whereas the theorists teach identity is shaped largely by social and historical forces. Ethics, objective morality is grounded in reason or nature, like the natural law. Compare that to critical theory. Moral norms are often seen as socially constructed. So critical theory espouses more of like a moral relativism view of the world. Like when it comes to issues like morality, there is no objective idea of what is right or wrong. It all depends on culture and ideology. So if you think to yourself, okay, you know, that sounds more right than there's a universal idea of right and wrong, like in the natural law, you're already thinking more along the lines of a theorist rather than a classic philosopher. Tradition, the intellect, the classical way of doing philosophy, you look as people like Plato and Aristotle, they're the wise sages, so to speak. Doesn't matter, we're reading about Aristotle 2,500 years later. We can still learn something and get something from reading somebody like Aristotle. Whereas if you read a theorist, that might ask a question like, okay, why are you reading Aristotle? Maybe reading Aristotle's teaching you how to think in a certain way so that you can be exploited. It's constantly asking questions about what types of ideologies are being put out there. You guys can kind of see ideology as something, and again, when it comes to my approach, I'm more of a philosopher than I am a critical theorist. It's kind of funny that I'm teaching this class because a lot of my own research is not really grounded much in critical theory. Some of it has been. I'm very much a new historicist, but critical theory kind of makes us ask, how are people trying to take advantage of us? What types of messages are being put out there? History is often a good thing to kind of look at from the perspective of critical theory. Like, think about like high school American history. High school American history oftentimes kind of puts this message out there: America is so great. America's never done anything wrong. Native Americans, we were just trying to make them Americans. Slavery was a temporary blip on the way to greatness. It ignores a lot of the ugly, like things like high school history, ignores a lot of the ugly aspects of our history. Whereas college history kind of looks at things more from a critical theory perspective. the study of history is ideological in nature. That vision that I just put out there, it's being put out there by certain types of people in charge. Um, you're starting to see this with the current administration. Like they just now they're trying to revise the Smithsonian Museum, for instance. I don't know if you guys saw that in the news. And they're trying to take away all mentions of slavery in the Smithsonian Museum. Um, they kind of want to put a certain view of history out there that we will all ascribe to, so that we will all be patriotic, blind Americans in that way. If you make everybody patriotic and turn the other cheek and not turn the other cheek's the wrong word. If you make everybody patriotic and look at things through blinders, then maybe you won't see things that are currently going on. It's very much the tradition of theory is thus a contrarian way of looking at the world. But if you ask me, even though I'm not really the type of person that does a lot of theory, it's very necessary. I personally disagree with the fact that I think that there is an objective truth. I don't think everything is socially constructed, but I do think a lot of things are socially constructed. We need to look at those things. And you guys have probably noticed as well, a class like this comes with certain challenges in our current political sphere. You might have heard about some of the concepts like critical race theory. Like Republicans currently love to use critical race theory as this kind of like boogeyman word. Ooh, how scary! Um, it's kind of like the buzzword that different conservative podcasters and stuff are using. And I don't want to sound like I'm picking on conservatives. There's certain issues that I'm more conservative on. I think of myself mostly as a liberal, but certain things I am pretty conservative on. I'm very much more of a moderate than most professors you might encounter. But you see all this talk, ooh, critical race theory, how awful. Why do they think it is awful? Well, if people are taking advantage of certain groups, you don't want them to know about it. You don't want them to think about it. Of course, you're going to put up the message out there that it's awful, because you're the one who's trying to exploit somebody in some type of way. So people are going to put that message out there. Oh, this is a waste of time. You're trying to brainwash people. No, not necessarily. Just because you study critical theory doesn't mean you have to believe it all. But it is a study worth pursuing. It is worth asking these questions. You can come up with your own interpretation on how you see these matters at the end of the day. It's something that I've done. I've thought about a lot of these big questions, and come up with my own opinions. You guys will too. So that is the first big handout. Let me go over the second one now. Then this next document that I've given you kind of goes along with the introductory reading that I had you do in that chapter in the textbook. And that's kind of on the broad history of critical theory, generally speaking, especially in literary studies. So let me pull this one up for you. So the study of literature, let's see, I'm no longer on that tab. All right. The study of literature is like a collegiate discipline. Goes back to the late 1800s, going into the 1900s. It has the study of literature as an art form has always been there, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. But as far as being something that you would study at like the collegiate level, it really got its roots in the early 1900s and late 1800s. And some of the earliest theorists that we'll read, people like the structuralists that we will read starting next week, a lot of this early theory is linguistics based. Like as the basic definition on this chart says, it asks questions like whenever you read a text, how do you construct meaning out of the text? Like what do certain symbols mean? Like take for instance, I don't know, rain. Let's take rain. Well, is rain, and whenever there's rain washing something off of somebody in a work of literature, should you just take that literally? Maybe there's a coding there. Maybe there's a deeper symbol. Like so, if somebody is being like, I don't know if you guys know that scene from the end of the Shawshank Redemption, where the guy gets out of the sewer after escaping from jail. He gets out and there's this awful thunderstorm. He raises his arms and the water's rinsing them all off. That type of thing is oftentimes seen like a baptism, washing you off of water, a renewal. Um, that is a type of symbolism that goes back through lots of different things happening in our culture. So, what the structuralists tried to do was look at things like that, symbols, metaphors, analogies. Um, they looked at how language is constructed, and they wanted to especially study how we get meaning from certain things. Like, how do we arrive at that baptism image of rain washing you off? How do we get there? So they really dig deep in studying linguistics. They want to study the structure of the language. They want to study things like oppositions, binaries, good, evil, right, wrong, um, codes. This this system wasn't necessarily about trying to figure out who's exploiting you and all that stuff that we was talking about a second ago. The study of theory really started in this um, sort of linguistics way. With this, you started studying these different concepts like power and race, gender. So this is kind of the building block on which we're going to build the whole rest of our class through the structuralists. And they were most popular, as the chart says, from the 1910s up through the 1960s. Not necessarily trying to figure out concepts of truth or anything like that. You're just the structuralists was just looking at the structure of how we do things. How do we make symbols? How do we make metaphors? How do we make meaning? The activity that we're going to talk about in a second about equivocal, univocal, and analogous language, I'm giving you the exercise because it's going to make you think more like a structuralist. The chart doesn't talk about it, but one of the developments in America around the 1940s, 1950s was a school called the New Criticism. What the New Criticism wanted to do, it wanted to make the study of literature. There's actually a supplemental reading on it in our Moodle shell for this week. It is the reading on Russian formalism and New Criticism. Check it out. But the new critics wanted to study literature just using literature vocabulary. Like, let's study like how a plot works, right? A plot has rising action, has a de-escalation, a catharsis. Let's study how the metaphors in the work. We won't go too deep into it, though. We won't go too deep into that. We're not going to look at like how baptism, the historical roots of that symbol. We're not going to go that deep. We're going to look at alliteration and how a poem rhymes. Is a poem structurally sound? Does the poem have meter? Like that study of literature was really popular from the 1940s through the 1960s. And it was popular in part because professors at the time were scared to death that they would be called communists. They didn't want to bring any ideology into their courses. Like, if you're studying, I don't know, say you're studying Othello, you would just look at that text. You wouldn't bring any history into the text. You wouldn't bring any discussions about race or whatever into the text. Instead, you would do things like look at passages. How is Shakespeare using alliteration here? How is he using analogy here? You would look at literature as kind of a self-contained thing. You wouldn't bring in any other types of knowledge into it. They did it that way because, again, they were afraid of being called communists. You might know about the Senator McCarthy's theory or committee on un-American activities. Senator McCarthy would call all these people into Congress, subpoena them in there, and then ruin their life by calling them a communist. It eventually reached a boiling point when he called a veteran in and called him a communist. The veteran asked him, "Do you have no decency?" And that guy finally just said what everybody else was thinking. It kind of sent McCarthy's career on a downward spiral. People were afraid of being called communists. So the New Criticism developed this whole study of literature around the text. Now, I don't want to de-emphasize the study of the text. You're not going to study literature in an interesting way without looking at the text. The text is the bedrock on which everything's built. If you try to put a theory onto something and it's not there in the text, it's not a good reading. Of course, anytime somebody reads a text, you put meaning on it, but also the text says what the text says. If you try to make it mean something that it's not, that it doesn't say, then it's probably not a good reading of the text. The New Criticism, the formalism, it came about around the same time as Structuralism. They're kind of the same thing in some ways. Structuralism is more linguistic based, formalism is more literature based. They both had the same goal in mind, looking at the innards and how things work, more so than looking at ideology. The week after that, the post-structuralists. challenges stable meaning and fixed truth, emphasizes instability of language, power, authorship, interpretation. So we would look at somebody like Derrida, Roland Barthes, Baudrillard. We're starting at that point, we'll get to more of this. There is no objective truth. How are people using language to construct ideology and power and things like that? Post-structuralism is the bedrock on which almost all the rest of the theory is built. It'll be a very important week in the class because everything in the class is rest of the class is kind of built on the assumptions that start with post-structuralism. Psychoanalysis looks at literature through unconscious desire, repression, identity formation, symbolism, and psychic conflict. And the major thinkers that are often cited is Freud and his disciple Lacan. I've actually asked Tara Mullins, the psychology professor, if she knows who Lacan is. She doesn't have much of a knowledge of him, and there's a reason for that. Lacan was a psychologist, but psychologists don't really read them. It's mostly just literature people. We're really interested in like what might be going on psychologically in the character's head. Like what desire does this character have? How is this character being repressed in some way? We'll go really deep into all that, especially when we read Freud and Lacan himself, but when we read G-Jack goes into all that too. Marxism. Marx himself didn't really do this with literature, but people took his ideas about government, things like that, and applied it to literature. Marxist and cultural materialist approaches look at how is people trying to keep you down based on your class. Class is a lens in which to look at the world. So thinking about like modern America, right? Think about how 80 to 90% of every dollar that is in America is controlled by the top 1%, the richest of the rich, the billionaires, the trillionaires, people like Elon Musk, right? Everybody else is competing for a very small piece of the pie. Well, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point where people willingly agree to this? A lot of people, why do people vote? People who are poor vote for people who are like billionaires. Well, ideology comes into that, right? That's kind of what the study of Marxism and cultural materialism likes to look at. How do people in charge use ideology to keep people in their place? That's do certain literary texts reinforce these systems that are used to keep people down? Do the literatures resist these structures and systems that try to keep people down? You guys know that I'm a Steinbeck scholar. Steinbeck is often read through this Marxist way because of works like The Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath, people burned it in the streets when it first came out because they thought that it was Marxist, socialist garbage. So we will look at Marxist approaches to literature, and you guys might be, I don't know if any of you guys are like super capitalists or whatever, but even if you are, you will, it's interesting to think about. The new historicism was a movement that really started taking place in the 1980s. And for the first time, not the first time, but but it really emphasized bringing history into literature. What's a good way to know what ideologies are and how ideologies are constructed? Let's look at historical documents. Let's look at things like that to figure it out. So the study of literature and history kind of go together like peanut butter and jelly. And then in recent decades, we started getting these more like identity focused forms of theory. So gender and queer theory looks at constructions of gender, sexuality, embodiment, identity, performance, and social power. So a lot of things that many people take for granted today, like gender identities. Like, is gender just based on your biology, your body parts? Or is gender maybe something that's more socially constructed? Today we have terms like cisgender and all these different notions. This all stems from theorists like Judith Butler. Judith Butler argues, as we'll find out later, that gender is something performative. She uses examples from writers like Shakespeare to point this out. This is a very contentious one today, because you have the traditionalists who argue gender is just something biological, and critical theorists argue no, it's something that we construct. And the people who argue it's just something biological really take hostile stances to people who argue otherwise. Critical race and ethnic studies. How is race constructed? How is race a concept? Like, race is deeper. It's more than just skin deep. Like these different concepts that we come up with about blackness, for instance. Oftentimes these concepts were used in order to justify awful systems of oppression of things like slavery. So critical race theory looks at stuff like that, especially kind of takes the notion that race is a major factor in how people are held down. And people of certain races or ethnicities probably have a harder time operating in the world than what a white person would. And a lot of people, more conservative thinkers, have a problem with that. No, everybody is on equal footing. We live in America, the land of the free. If you work hard, you can be successful, no matter what your race is. Whereas critical race theory kind of looks at it in more of a cynical way. We'll talk about the merits of that as we go, or lack thereof. Post-colonial studies looks especially at issues like empire construction. This is really something that's been done a lot with British lit, because the British colonized most of the known world. We talked about that a little in our advanced studies class when we talked about Dracula. Right? But the British colonized most of the known world. Whenever they put attitudes and about different types of people, like at the beginning of Dracula, for instance, you might remember Jonathan Harker talks about how simple these people in Romania are. They're doing their signs of the cross. Compared to him, the enlightened British man, they're boiled down in superstition and myth. These are all messages that are being put out there in order to justify oppressing or taking advantage of these people. And you see that a lot whenever you're talking about whenever you have literature taking place in different places where people have been taken advantage of, like Africa, Asia. You can even look at things like Native American literature from a post-colonial view. We'll end the class talking about eco-criticism, You examine the environment, ecology, climate, animal sustainability, and human nature relationships. How do we construct ideologies about nature? About how do we control the environment? What do we think about how we control the environment? How do we treat animals? How does literature depict how we treat animals? How can we live in a better, more sustainable world where humans and nature are more in harmony with each other? We will end the class close to the end with that. This one is the big one right now, guys. Whenever I go to academic conferences, like every year, the last 2 years, I went to the Western American Literature Conference about Western books taking place in the American West. Every year I go, probably 80% of the papers at the entire conference have an ecological bend to them. Here I am writing about St. Thomas Aquinas or something, while everybody else is writing about this stuff. This one is the big trend. So if you go into literary studies at this point in time, this is currently the most popular one. It was even while I was in graduate school. I actually took a whole seminar just on eco-criticism. Do I ground my own work in it though? No, that's just my own choice. But it is a very prominent school. And if it's done right, it's a very valuable way to do it. I'll talk more about it when we get there, but I think a lot of it's kind of tacky. But I'll give you my opinions on that as we go. This is kind of the roadmap in which our entire course will be built right here. The last thing that I want to talk about is this reading that I've given you on univocal, equivocal, and analogous language. And this reading comes from a logic text. So whenever you see words that are, whenever we see words, there's a notion of what do these words have to do with each other? Like let's say we put two words together and they have the exact same meaning. Like the way that we think about, even though we're using a word, but we're using it mean the same thing. That is a univocal connection between words. If we take two words together, maybe lots of times this whole exercise is based on how words oftentimes have more than one meaning. Well, if we have a word and we look at here's what it means in this case, here's what it means in this case. If you can't see any connection at all between between these two different meanings of the words, if you just wrap your brain and can't think of any connection, that's called an equivocal meaning. The word equivocation is actually a logical fallacy grounded on people who purposely try to do this, twist more than one meaning of a word. And then you have what's called an analogous reading, an analogous connection. Like this one's a little tougher to explain, but there's a connection there. It's an analogy that you can make between these two different concepts. And whenever you do these, you have to be a little careful not to think about analogy and metaphor like they're the same thing. Um, you can point to something concrete, and with an analogy, you can point to something concrete that is similar about the two things. Whereas a metaphor, you might be able to think about something that's similar, but it's not necessarily concrete. So that's kind of the distinction. If you take a look, well, I'll see how you guys do on the quiz. I'm anticipating that, especially since we're not here to discuss this together, you might struggle with it a little bit. If you do, I will give you a second one. That's my plan. Let's take a look here at this chapter in the practice problems. So remember, univocal, the words mean the same thing. Equivocal, there's no connection. Analogous, there's something concrete in which they're similar. So if we have pitcher as signifying a container of water and a baseball player. So a pitcher in which you might pour a lemonade compared to a pitcher in baseball, right? Throws the ball. Any connection at all between those two things? No. This one's pretty easy. Like this one is equivocal. Like there's no, these are two completely different meanings of the word pitcher. Like if you wanted to really overthink it, you could say, well, you're using this pitcher to distribute water from one place to another. A pitcher in baseball is distributing a ball from one place to another. You could really overthink it, but really they have no connection. I'll just walk you guys through the next two. Tragic is signifying a condition of man and a type of accident. Think about tragic, like Oedipus and Oedipus the king. He's in a tragic condition, right? Compare that to let's say you get into a car wreck and whoever's in the car with you dies, right? That is a tragic accident. So what is the tragic condition of man versus the tragic situation in this accident? Well, they're both, you're taking the same idea about tragedy and applying it to both situations. One's more of a universal condition, one's a certain situation, but the same idea about tragedy holds. So even though it's two different situations, two different meanings almost, it's a similar idea among both. So this one would be analogous. And then athlete is signifying a swimmer and a wrestler. Well, a swimmer is an athlete, wrestler is an athlete. Both of them kind of follow from the same meaning of athlete. So this one would be univocal. Metal is signifying iron and copper. Well, just like with number 3, iron is a metal, copper is a metal. It's univocal. It's the same thing. Metal signifying both of those things, it's univocal. It's the same thing. Nerve is signifying a band of living tissue, and pluck. Pluck means courage. This one's a little tougher. Think about like inside, like lots of times people would use something like cat guts. right? Back in the day when people would, my grandmother had an aneurysm and they tied her brain together with cat gut, cat intestines. It sounds a little gross, right? But it actually kept her alive for 30 years until those guts one day snapped and it killed her instantly. Think about something like cat guts, right? Um, it's tough. You can't break it. Um, compare that to courage. Is there really a connection there? I think if you really stretched it, you could make the case for analogous, but really guts, yeah, like literal guts, and then courage. Um, you have guts. You can really stretch that, I think, but really it's equivocal. There's not even, it's a real big stretch to make the case for analogous. If you did put analogous, I might count it. But it's more, it's not really necessarily a connection. Walk, just to kind of scroll through to go through some more analogous ones. Walk is signifying a movement in a pathway. The walk, you're literally walking one place to another. A pathway, maybe the sidewalk on the campus. Well, one's the literal motion, and the other one is a place where you're doing the motion. So that one would be analogous. It's not the same thing, but you're applying the same concept to both things. Beautiful is signifying a person and the complexion of a person. The idea of beauty, you're applying it to two different things, so analogous. So you guys just take a stab at this, see how you do with the exercises. It'll get you thinking along the right lines to start the structuralism unit. We'll talk about them next time. We'll go over the quiz together and see how you did. If you don't do well, I'll write another one and give you a retake. So between now and next Monday, do the quiz on univocal, equivocal, and analogous. Do the AI quiz. And complete your first round of readings. And do your first Pressy ahead of the next class. In the next class, we will all come together and discuss structuralism. That was a lot for the first day. Hell, I ran it for an hour and a half. I didn't even have anybody to bounce off of, so I must have had a lot of stuff to talk about. Hopefully that gives you a nice grounding on what you're getting yourself into. So good luck, guys, with the first round of readings. I'm around this week if you need me for anything. Take care and have a good one.